those 4 seats at the start that they were the key to us winning majority government last time in the southeast. So Aspley, Mansfield, Redlands,
Hey, Jason and Catalina.
That we have to hold on to all those. And based on
G'day,
the
g'day.
figures, we
Hello.
are going to see all those seats.
Hello.
How are things?
So-
It's encouraging from our point of view that we sort of want to bank those.
Yeah, this is. I was interested to see how this election was going to go, and I thought others might be interested too. But I haven't promoted this at all, so anyone that's seeing it has found out for themselves. Catalina, you're the local person on the ground. Can you tell us what is happening today in Queensland?
All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm the presenter for today's election. And basically, Queensland has gone to the votes, and we are going to be electing a new political party, or it is continuing with the existing political party. And yeah, I guess like every election, there are always different arguments that everyone has for defending or pretty much going against certain political parties. And I guess, you know, with every election, there always comes ideas and things that people are trying to push, and things that I believe the population in general are trying to work out, hey, how legit is this going to be? Are they going to keep to the promises that they're making? And I guess, yeah, with this election, it's not like there's any difference. I think everyone is still going towards with a little bit of reluctancy of trying to see what is going to happen in the future of, I guess, our state. So yeah, that's what we're watching right now as we speak.
Yeah. So, all right. I'm just thinking maybe for anyone that's watching, maybe afterwards from outside Australia, maybe would say a couple of things about the different parties involved. Now, the intention of this is not to be partisan or to push any particular party, but to try to describe it as objectively as we can see. Maybe that would be helpful for people. Maybe it won't. Let us know if you think it's useful. So the main, I guess, the party that's in government is the Labor Party, and the Labor Party is related to the Labor Party in the United Kingdom. And it's actually, I don't know your impression, Catalina, or Jason. Jason's also with us. He's invisible, but he's there. I reckon they're probably the most successful political party overall in Australia. When you look at the history, Labor Party goes back almost all the way to Federation, and they've existed from that point, and they've always had, they've always been one of the two major parties from that time since they first existed. So pretty successful, and they're the ones that are currently, as I think I mentioned, in government in Queensland.
Yeah, they kind of, I guess, relate closely to the labor force, like the working class people. I think that's kind of where their base is. But
yeah, and of course that's the majority of people, isn't it? so kind of makes sense.
But, yeah.
But I think
and I think
go on.
You
I was just going to say, I think more the significant thing though is that they have succeeded in keeping the loyalty of that demographic, because it's all very well to say that you stand for someone, but to actually get them to vote for you is an entirely different thing.
Yeah. I think what's another really important principle, if we have a look at the majority of the Australian population, it's the working class. It's the middle working class. And if we really consider, the principles and the people that the Labor Party tries to represent and to fight for and to, I guess, bring about change, it's predominantly found within that working middle class. So I guess if we were to really look at maybe a political party that probably most represents the majority of the population of Australia, I think the Labor Party can probably do that with, maybe a bit more accuracy, or they can identify at least with some of the needs that the majority of Australians are wanting and are expecting. So, yeah, I guess they have succeeded because of that reason. They always try and represent the majority of what Australia represents.
I think another aspect in which they've been successful is they've tended to be the party that's been pushing whatever agenda is before the people. So you look at the issues that they initially existed to push were things like 8-hour working days, more holidays, weekends, that kind of stuff. So a lot of the things that they have actually historically stood for are already a fact. It is the way it is. So, and even today, they tend to be the ones that are advocating certain policies, and the alternative seems to be generally just saying, well, we'll do the same, but not so much. I don't know if that's an impression anyone else has had.
I'm not sure how they are in Queensland, but like in Victoria, where I'm at, they're kind of seen as more progressive compared to the Liberals are a little bit more conservative. They have kind of that feel to them, or a lot of their policies are along those kinds of lines.
Yeah,
but I'm not
definitely.
sure
So
how it is in Queensland.
Well, Catalina, maybe you'd agree with that.
Look, I probably couldn't make an educated comment on that because I must say, politics, I try and avoid most of it as much as I can. So I wouldn't be able to make an educated opinion on that and either agree or disagree with that. But I do have a rough idea of some of the policies that they stand for, but I couldn't say with complete confidence, yes, I can agree or disagree with that.
Yeah, I think generally the Labor Party is considered to be centre-left and the Liberal Party is considered to be centre-right. So I think that's, generally speaking at least, I think that's a pretty accurate statement.
But
all right, so go on.
Daniel, even in my sociology studies, so there was traditionally this idea of left and right. And even within that, as I study in a secular university, now there is a shift between not only left and right, but authoritarian and libertarian politics. So even though we can all be on, I guess, this horizontal plane that we have always just referred to as left and right, now even within lefts and rights, there is this idea of a more libertarian approach to political policies and, I guess, government control. And then there's an authoritarian perspective to being a right and a left. So I'm finding, which is really interesting because we have this shift within Christianity where, people don't want to identify a certain way, but we're finding that within politics as well. And I found it extremely interesting to see that same sort of shift within the political identities that, the population, the secular population, is sort of trying to work out, hey, I'm not actually left, I'm left authoritarian or I'm right authoritarian. So there's a lot of diversity and people actually don't want to be simply called left and right. And I think politics will reflect that as well. What was traditionally a right or a left idea or a left or right policy, I guess, direction is actually shifting. And I find that really interesting to see that within the political space.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I've seen a bit of that. For example, what I mean is I've seen a bit of a non-match, maybe we should say, a lack of matching between certain political parties and the people that actually vote for them. And so you've got people that when they're given a chance to vote outside of a party context, they'll vote quite differently than if they're voting in a general election where they'll end up being loyal to the party that they are familiar with and that their friends are in and all that kind of thing. And, for example, I'm thinking of the Brexit vote. It was a famous one where the Labor Party and the Conservative Party in the UK both advocated staying in the European Union, but the actual members of both parties were split 50-50, basically, where half of them voted to leave and half of them voted to stay. Philip Smith says something. He says, I went to uni with the Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk. I predict that ALP will retain government, but it is close. It's interesting, Philip. That's interesting trivia, but also, it's interesting that you say it's close, because I mean it's very hard, I guess. Well, that looks close there, doesn't it? What does it say? 37 to 34. But
Yeah, 3%.
the bar at the bottom was saying like 37 to 27, which doesn't sound close at all. Maybe you can explain to us what the difference is there. Maybe one of them's a predicted vote, one of them's a decided one or something. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe we should ask you for some insights, but maybe we'll leave that to Catalina if you want to know more about your premier. It's a bit. It's kind of doesn't mean a lot to us here.
Yeah.
Like, I guess,
Yeah.
what is the main? Sorry, I was
No,
going to
you
ask.
go, Jason.
What is the main kind of issue? Because all we hear in Victoria is about the borders. It's all on the borders being closed. But is there any actual other issues that they have to decide in Queensland?
Not that I'm aware, but again, I'm probably not the best person to inform you on what our different parties are actually, wanting to implement and the decisions that they're wanting to change or to continue. But COVID has definitely thrown a spanner in the works. I think COVID has exposed maybe some ways of leading. I think it has created a little bit more of, I guess people just are a little more apprehensive about the current premier and how she is sort of dealing with things. But I would be really interested to see if it had have been another party, how they would have gone about trying to do the same things that she was trying to do. I feel to a certain degree, some of her decisions have been highlighted as weaknesses relating to the party, where it probably is just a situation where I don't think anyone knew how to deal with things. And whether she made the best decisions or not, she probably didn't. I'm sure she's made plenty of mistakes. But I don't know if that is actually associated with the party and with their policies, rather than, I don't think any premier has had to deal with a pandemic before, and in the way that we have found it to sort of happen in Australia.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, at least here in Australia, the response to the pandemic's been pretty similar regardless of party. There hasn't been much difference. Philip Smith says, ALP has gained percentage statewide, but so has LNP, though not as much. It would be unusual for a sitting government to gain overall percentage and lose, although not impossible. And he adds that he's in WA, which I was aware of that, Phil. Yeah. So, it'll be interesting to see what happens in WA, I guess, because they've had a similar kind of situation, haven't they? But I had heard about an issue, Catalina, that I'm almost surprised you hadn't heard about it. Maybe you have, which apparently Indigenous crime was being made into an issue in this election. Have you heard anything about that?
No, I hadn't, but trust me, I don't probably listen to as much news and current up-to-date news reports as I should. So yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
Well, I'm not saying you should, but it's just a bit of a case of something that I know you got an interest in. But yeah, so the point being that there's this. Obviously, one side would like to say that they're going to be tough on crime, and the other side's going to say that they're going to be, looking out for the interests of the poor, and it tends to fall that way. Although, really, in my mind, I think if policing is done properly, more policing should be a good thing. But the problem is, so often policing, at least here in Australia, at least here in the 21st century, seems to be all about imposing from above onto people what they don't want, rather than the old. Like, when I say the old style, I mean I'm talking about when the police force was first founded by Sir Robert Peel, and the police didn't even carry a weapon. They weren't there to impose anything on people. They were just there to observe, and they had a uniform so that people knew that they were, if they committed a crime, someone was there that would be able to be observant, make notes, and they could later on be, apprehended. And so it wasn't a kind of reactive, aggressive policing. It was, well, when I say reactive, I mean aggressive. it was an investigative, sort of preventative kind of community style. And, you know, I haven't always felt that way, but especially in the last few years, I've begun to feel that we've lost that a lot in policing, and it's become more of a, you know, more in a almost paramilitary kind of institution rather than a community institution, a local institution.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't see either party saying anything about that. I see both parties, like you say, being more authoritarian and yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. And I think that is a really valid point. And honestly, I don't know if a political party can address that, but rather I feel it's a deconstruction of what our police, like what their role is in certain situations. I know through my social work degree, they've actually gave us a bit of information that in Portland, Oregon, they are actually trialing sending out social workers to certain situations where police have been called, because they're saying that police aren't trained to be able to deal with conflict resolution. And when you're dealing with a situation where there's a lot of escalation happening, where there's, you know, domestic violence, drug abuse, the police aren't trained to be able to deal with those situations and be able to manage them in a way that it can help de-escalate the situation. And because of that, they're trialing out sending social workers because they feel that they can actually go into the situation and mediate in between the two parties. And it's a less aggressive, it's a less defensive type way. People won't automatically be like, oh, they're here to treat me a certain type of way, which is the way that now a lot of people are responding with regards to seeing the police, especially with everything that's going on in the United States of America with Black Lives Matters. People already have this idea of if a police officer is going to show up somewhere, they think that they're going to respond in a certain kind of way. So yeah, I believe that needs to be addressed, especially with regards to the way that Indigenous Australians are treated. So yeah, I can see that would be a valid point to bring up, but I don't know if it can necessarily be resolved through policies and legislations, but rather it's a deconstruction of the police force and giving adequate training in specific situations, psychological training, counseling, and a different approach to policing rather than, like you said, just showing up and waving a gun around and expecting that that's going to fix things.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, when the police were first given guns, although I don't know whether here in Australia they might have always had them, but at least in the UK when they were first given guns, the assumption was that they would only use them in self-defense, you know, to protect their own lives. But once you've got the weapon, the temptation to use it is always there. And yeah, it really is very strange. When I say strange, it's counterintuitive to the way that we tend to think these days. That in the UK, you could own a gun as an ordinary citizen, but the police weren't armed. I'm talking like back in the days of, you know, think Sherlock Holmes and all that kind of like that sort of period. The ordinary citizen was allowed to own a gun, but the police were not allowed to carry a gun. And yet, very few police were killed because it was extremely, you know, you were guaranteed to have the death penalty if you killed a police officer. Whereas, you know, you might be able to get out of, you know, whatever other crime it was that you were committing. So even, it's a strange thing to look back on that today, and we see kind of our assumption is that, oh, the police have to have, you know, like I haven't seen the actual Batman movie, but I saw the prequel or the first one, Batman Begins, and there's this line in there, something about, you know, the bigger weapons the police have, the bigger weapons the criminals will get, and it's true. Once again, I know it's just a movie, but I think that is actually true. It's not that hard for a criminal to get a weapon, and if they know that the police have a machine gun or whatever, then they'll get a machine gun. You know, or you can't outgun crime. you've got to do it through community. You got to do it through, proper sentencing as well. And actual just sentences, punishment for crime. I believe in punishment, but it's got to be just. And it's if it's not, then all of a sudden it just becomes the police are just one more gang to fight on the streets, and that's just a terrible situation.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I agree. Can I just throw a random point out though? I did see the Greens, and obviously their votes, and I think this is probably one of the years where I think there has been more support for the Greens than I have previously seen. And I don't know what factors have contributed to that. I don't know if it's a younger population that are sort of getting behind the Greens, and obviously they have a greater awareness about environmental issues that are impacting Australia and the world, and obviously all those types of things. So, I did want to give a shout out, I suppose, to the growth of awareness with regards to the environment and desiring to take care of the environment. And obviously there's different ideas of what people think about global warming and all those types of things. But
sure.
I guess, it's worth acknowledging the fact that, there is definitely a greater awareness within, I think, the world about the condition of our land and our earth and the direction that it's going and what we can do to help, I guess, lessen the impact of what we're doing to it.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing up the Greens. So we talked about the Labor Party. Let's talk about the other. It's technically a minor party, but it's also extremely successful. It's not as old as the Labor Party, but it has been consistently the third biggest party in Australia ever since I remember, and I suspect probably almost ever since it first was founded. The Greens Party. Jason, what can you tell us about the Greens Party? Do you know anything about it?
Not much.
It's got the word green. Something about Brussels sprouts, maybe.
Greg, they're hippies and they all live in vans in Byron Bay. No.
They eat Brussels sprouts. They eat their greens.
And they don't use plastic.
The big party that I guess the third biggest party used to be the Democrats, but they kind of disappeared off the face of the earth.
Yeah, they sure did. I remember them. I remember when the last time they had any power, when I was in primary school. Yeah. When I say power, I mean they had the balance of power with 3 votes.
Yeah. I must be too old.
Well, it just makes that difference.
What was the reason as to why they have lost power in the political space? Was there anything specific?
They had a good leader, Natasha Despoja, I think.
Natasha, someone, I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I think they had a falling out in the party, and then it kind of petered out. And then what was her name? Came along. The Queenslander with red hair.
Pauline Hanson.
That's the one. And she came along.
You should get a GIF of Pauline Hanson so that people who are watching this can see the glory of what only Australia can produce. I got respect for Pauline Hanson. She is a battler. She's a true Australian. But anyway, see if you can get a GIF of her saying, "Please explain."
I'm like, make her a Christian, and I'm like, imagine what she could do for the church.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah. I have no idea about her as an individual, like what she's like. But I do remember when I was in primary school, once again, that she was the one that everyone joked about and mocked as being worthless. And I do remember, I know we're supposed to be talking about the Greens. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Anyway, I do remember that there was a talk. She actually went to prison for some sort of fraud. And this is in relation to having pretended that they got more votes than they did or something. But anyway, that's a very vague memory. That was from when I was in primary school, so I could be totally wrong. But the point is that to have been able to make it again in politics after something like that shows enormous nerve and determination. And I think that's at least the way we like to think of ourselves as Aussies, whether we are or not. So the Greens, okay. Yeah, go on.
With Pauline, I don't necessarily agree with much of her policies and agenda,
Sure.
but
Whatever they are.
she does seem to be passionate about it, whereas you see some of the Labor and Liberal, they're kind of like, whatever happens, I'm still going to get votes anyway.
Yeah.
So they kind of pandered to, I guess, a lot more lobby groups.
And
whereas,
and it's funny you should say that, Jason, because I've been watching some different stuff about public speaking and how to be effective public speakers. And they said most of the people will not remember what you said, but they'll remember how you were. And I think Pauline Hanson is a perfect example of that. I think most people do not have a great idea of what her policies are, but just her personality, her zeal, and her passion in whatever it is that she's telling us about is what stands out. And that woman definitely has like a resilience to stand up for her policies, for the beliefs that she has for Australia, in a way that I think you forget other people's, policies and what they're presenting, because you're just like, wow, Pauline Hanson, like she really believes in what she wants to do for Australia. So yeah, I do agree that she definitely has a passion for her party and for the things that they want to implement.
Yeah. So speaking of passion, the Greens, now to me, the Greens are like the artistic younger brother of the Labor Party.
Okay.
They don't really stand for the working class like Labor do, but they stand for the same kinds of policies, right? So they're very, very close, and they tend to work together. This is a difference. The Labor and Greens do this a lot. Like, you wouldn't find the Greens supporting the Liberals to form a government, right? But they would form a government with Labor. So they have similar kind of policies, but the Greens tend to actually influence Labor more than Labor influences the Greens. The Greens are much more, like you said, like you were saying, Catalina, much more passionate, much more zealous in their ideas, but they tend to be, people from very nice places, like inner city, out here in Melbourne anyway. They tend to be sort of some of the really nice eastern suburbs. So they're not the kind of rough and tough Labor cliche kind of people, but they've got a similar kind of ideas. And I think the same people exist also in the Labor Party as well. It's just a matter of whether they would prefer to actually be in the party that's actually in government, or whether they would prefer to be in the party that will never be in government but will have an ideological impact on the conversation. I think the Greens, if you look at what their policies were when I was a kid under Bob Brown, everything that they were saying then is basically every major political party's policy now. But they have never been in power, and they've virtually had no seats. And it's interesting that I noticed just before we went live, there were a few of those seats that were being highlighted, and they were actually going to the Greens. And I thought, wow, Queensland. I thought Queensland was very like, there was a whole thing in the federal election where Adani was a big issue, and they weren't very happy with the Greens at that time. So it's interesting that it's kind of swung back. Weird, isn't it, how it swings back and forth?
Yeah, and I would love to be able to know what contributes to that. What contributes to this just rise and fall of different popularities, different, I guess, the power seat gets shifted. But I don't know. I don't know if it's a younger population that are more aware of these things. Like you said, I think typically we've associated, the Greens representing like tree-hugging hippies, where actually, like you were saying, they're a highly educated group of people who are extremely aware of, I guess, the impact of so many social contributors to our environment. They're very informed, very educated, And I think they are becoming more and more a generation. And again, I'm making the assumption that it's younger people that are like, no, we need to make our vote count. Our vote counts. Therefore, there is a shift. There is a rise in the popularity, or at least in the understanding of green policies. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what creates that shift. And I would love to be able to be one of those data analysts who'd be able to say, well, this is why.
Yeah. Maybe I had to hear a train in the background there. Yeah, look, and I don't know if it's people getting, because it's only been a year or two since the federal election, but it also can be the size of the constituencies. You know, a smaller constituency, so a smaller area of voters can highlight smaller little communities within the broader population, and it can help them to get seats that they wouldn't get on the federal level. But we will move now as the train goes past.
12% swing. The seat of Cooper, they just had a 12% swing. I don't know where Cooper is. Towards the Greens.
Oh, wow. Okay. Cooper. Yeah. Well, I lived one time in a place called Cooper's Plains, but I don't know if that's related. Anyway. Yeah. Hello, train. Just going past.
We can't hear
I'm in Eagle. You can't hear it? Okay. I'm in Eagle Hawk Station. Anyway, all right. So so we're now moving across to the other side. Now, it was interesting, Catalina, you made a comment about the left-right distinction being kind of a bit more meaningless now. And I think in terms of Australian politics, that's sort of always been the case, the way that the government has been set up. Now, when we first federated as a country, Australia had two political parties. Neither of them have existed for a very, very long time. One of them, I don't remember what they were actually called. They had some patriotic sounding names, but one of them was essentially a party that would try to protect Australian industries, and the other was essentially a party that would promote free trade. And those parties don't exist anymore, but you could call that the National Party and the Liberal Party respectively in terms of what we have today. So on that side of the political aisle, as it were, you have the Liberal Party, which is the free trade party primarily. It's that seems to be the issue that they're most passionate about. Maybe they're passionate about some other issues as well. And you have the National Party, which I've never lived in a National Party like area, but I like them. My family is originally from a National Party area, and that's still kind of the way that we, the kind of country loyalty, national loyalty, protecting Australian industries. So once again, you have this here in the Liberal Party, which people say, well, it's the Conservative Party of Australia, but it's not so much a Conservative party as a party that is combining people who want free trade and people who don't want free trade, which I guess is probably the reason why it has very little effect on the actual long-term. Like I'm not aware of many long-term effects of the Liberal Party on the actual direction of Australian society or attitudes or beliefs. It tends to be the Labor Party that influences those, and the Liberal Party is just like a pair of brakes that says, well, not so fast, let's slow down, or let's do this. I think the Liberal Party has made some good contributions, but I've noticed that it just doesn't seem to really stand for anything much. And your point about authoritarian versus libertarian, that I think would be an axis where the Liberal Party would be much more comfortable to say that they are libertarian, and they would feel at home, I think, with that designation. Whereas I don't think they really feel comfortable with being considered right-wing, and I don't think they really feel comfortable with being considered conservative. That's my impression anyway. But yeah, if that changed and that became the axis of policy, I don't know if it will. I feel like those two tendencies sort of tend to exist in everyone. But they would probably be happy with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, look, when we really try and consider it all, realistically, a lot of the underlying issues that come with different political parties are then attached to like capitalist society and socialist societies. So there's so many other, like, I feel like it's like an onion. You just peel a layer off to reveal the policies party, like the party's policies, only to realize like there's another layer to their policies, and it just continues. And I don't think you can ever completely detach a party from further underlying motives or underlying ideas, socialist ideas or capitalist ideas. I think there's just so much that's interweaved into a party and into their policies and into the things that they want to try and bring into Australia. So yeah, it is a little complicated, but I do believe that free trade or free market is definitely one of the biggest things that can separate the direction of a party.
And speaking, you mentioned about socialism. There was once a communist party in Australia, and during the Cold War, at some point, it was actually abolished. So there's not allowed to be a communist party, which is, I think, quite interesting. I think that's resulted in a lot of those communists going to either the Labor Party or the Greens and trying to pursue that agenda through those parties rather than because they can't have a political party of their own. Which I think is also part of the reason why the Labor Party, which used to be extremely socially conservative, for one thing, has become much more socially libertarian or progressive, or whatever. Jason, you got any thoughts on that or on the Liberal Party?
Yeah, like my thoughts on the Liberal and the Nationals, it was kind of like you have Labor that kind of looks after the blue collar type workers, whereas the Liberals are more into the white collar workers, the kind of the top end of town, the finance industry and big business, if that makes sense.
True.
And
yeah.
And then the Nationals were kind of looking out for the farmers and the country people, and they were, in my kind of understanding, Labor Party's what always kind of spending, like they're doing projects, they're building things, they're doing this, so they usually rack up a lot of debt as a government, whereas
something that people with good financial heads don't like so much.
So, and that, and then the Liberals and would kind of be trying to get the budget into the black, that kind of thing. So they'd rein in more of the spending. But
so someone on Twitch called Sorta says the Nationals have a monopoly on power in regional areas. I think that's essentially true. I don't think it has to always be true, but I think that's essentially true. And the reason for that is that the Nationals, that's kind of their only reason for existence, is to advocate for issues that are important to regional Australia. And the other political parties kind of don't care about regional. But it would be it would be good to see real competition, because I think competition is healthy, at least in a secular context, and it would be good to see an actual viable alternative for the country, that there'd be someone else that they could vote for that would actually represent their values. I think sometimes people come along and pretend to, or whatever, but the issue with the Nationals, once again, is that because they're allied with the Liberals and the Liberals have almost an opposite agenda, it means that when they do something, it's probably pretty well thought through, but they often just don't do anything, really. What's this? Says SSAF are probably the best competition. Shooters, fishers, and farmers. Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very tiny party, but maybe we'll see if that becomes an issue. He also makes a comment here about the debt fallacy. which I'm assuming is this one, a government debt doesn't equal household debt. I don't think that's what Jason was saying. What Jason was saying was that regardless of whether it's a good or bad thing to get into debt as a government, the Labor Party tends to be the one that does that, and the Liberal Party tends to be the one that pays the debt back. And you do eventually have to pay the debt back. So, someone's got to do it. And to me, what that says, apart from the fact that maybe financial people might like Liberals better, is that the Labor Party, once again, ends up determining the agenda, because they're the ones spending the money. They're the ones deciding on what it should be spent for. So the Liberal Party has very little influence, really. Hugh Miles says that's who I voted for. I assume he's talking about the shooters, fishers, and farmers. So that's interesting. We got a few shooters, fishers, and farmers here with us tonight, and you guys are really welcome to be here and part of the discussion. I don't know if they have a significant representation in Queensland. Anyone can comment on that? I would have assumed so, but sometimes these things happen.
I live in semi-rural Queensland, and amongst the people here, I think there is always this disconnection between the city folk and the country folk. And I think I feel from the vibe that I get from the people that I speak with the locals here, people that have grown up in this area, I really sense that a lot of people don't want to vote for a party that does not know what it's like to be a farmer. They don't know what it's like to live through droughts and to live through some of the harsh conditions that they have to live through as farmers and as people that work on the land. So I do believe that for parties as small as they may be, like the shooters, fishers, and farmers, I do believe that they are going to naturally have locals' votes, because they do represent a group of people that I think often just can't relate to the people in this area. We don't farm on our property. Our property is here just to grow a lot of stuff that we don't need. It's all overgrown. But I do know that with the people that are around this area, so I'm in Gingin, Queensland, and there's a lot of cattle farmers, there's a lot of small crops and even large crops, there's a lot of sugarcane. And there's definitely this idea that unless people know what we're going through, like, we don't even want to bother giving them our votes, because they just will not understand how to help us, how to implement the changes that are needed in our areas to provide the best amount of change and to be of the most benefit to our area. So yeah, I agree that there's room for them. And I think they will get a lot of support based purely on the fact that they are being sensitive to the fact that being a farmer is something that not many people understand what it's like and what they go through.
I think also you got to look at what their preferences are as well. So like, you vote for shooters, fishers, and farmers, they might not win a seat, but their preferences go to someone who's going to win the seat, which is usually a Liberal or a Labor.
Jason, if there are any other comments, just put them up and read them out for me if they're going to contribute to the conversation. I just wanted to make the comment first. I'm just not looking at the screen right now. I just want to make the comment that it's interesting to note that our shooters, fishers, and farmers friends here seem to have less concern about debt than, for example, a Liberal voter would. And I think that's probably also true for the Nationals, although they tend to be a bit more financially conservative or fiscally conservative as well. But it highlights something that I sort of wanted to draw attention to with the other major parties involved. So on the right, so-called, right? So that would be One Nation, Pauline Hanson's party. I don't know, Jason, if you got the if you got a gift there of Pauline Hanson that we can show people, but Pauline Hanson, and then there's Bob Katter's Australian party. Is that the Australia party? Something like that. Anyway, Bob Katter's party. So they are actually very different from each other, but they're both kind of considered to be far right. I actually think that Pauline Hanson is not far right. I think Pauline Hanson is far right on some issues and also sort of centrist on other issues. And I noticed that when people who normally vote for Pauline Hanson, they tend to actually vote Labor when they're not voting for her. I don't know if anyone else has noticed that.
I don't know. I haven't noticed.
Okay. Yeah.
But again, I don't get involved in politics much, so you're lucky I'm not here to.
No, it's good. It's good. Good to. Well, this is the thing. Most people don't, but it's just an observation that I've noticed. Yeah. Pauline Hanson is someone that she sticks through, good times and bad. She doesn't quit, but she has had lots of good times and lots of bad times in her career. And when she is weak, the vote seems to go to Labor. It doesn't seem to go to the Liberal Party. I guess what I'm saying is that Pauline Hanson voters are not Liberal Party people that just want something a bit stronger, that want something a bit tougher, right? They're actually Labor voters that usually, I think, that want stronger borders. And because Palaszczuk has been, everyone's been criticising her, well, not everyone, but lots of people have been criticising her for being too tough on the borders. I just wonder whether this is the reason why One Nation is not doing so well this time around. Because I don't know. Can you see there on the screen if it's showing what the One Nation numbers are so far?
They're not so good. That's what I've been seeing. But yeah, most of them down a bit, but I'm not really on top of it.
Yeah. So it's I don't know any other issue that Pauline Hanson is famous for except for strong borders. That's sort of been her thing from the beginning, like way back. And if Palaszczuk is kind of making a name for herself as someone who's tough on borders, even though it's not actually the border that I would think of as being the border that One Nation is normally talking about, One Nation themselves have been a lot more encouraging of opening the border between New South Wales and Queensland, and it seems like maybe they're getting punished for it politically, like electorally. All right. Anyone know anything about Bob Katter's party? Because it's another one of the parties that has, as far as I'm aware, it's really just built around Bob Katter, who's basically the most cliche Australian in politics, if that's.
Yeah, I think he gets kind of mocked a little bit in the media. I don't know much about him.
Yeah.
We got a comment from Sora.
So he's the one that made asked a question about something, and he sort of started to answer the question, and then he all of a sudden pivoted to, but what about the crocodiles? Okay.
Sort of made a joke.
Can you read it out?
He goes, Bob Katter's policies are bipolar, is the best explanation.
Can you read it?
Yeah. He said Bob Katter's policies are bipolar. Do you understand what bipolar means?
We may have lost Danny.
Yep. Sounds like he's.
So I've just had a quick look. On my phone at. No, actually, I don't think that's his. I was just trying to find what his policies are. And so it says there's 20 key points. But let me just have a quick scroll through and I'll get back to you on that. It seems like he's trying to cover energy and resources, trade, treasury. Yeah, there was a few. It looked like it was a great variety, a great diversity of things that he's trying to cover with his party. So I can understand why that person's comment was like bipolar. Might be a little bit all over the place and extreme in one area and not as consistent in others.
Yeah.
So it says agriculture, economy and industry, energy, environment, firearms, First Nation, Australians, health, infrastructure, justice, rural and regional, transport and water. That was on his website. Key policies.
There's another comment. He's for public ownership of things like the electricity grid, holding a left-leaning view on it. But he also supports increasing coal subsidies, which could be considered more right-leaning.
Okay, yeah.
So
Okay,
I think
can you hear me
what
now,
he
by
was-
the way?
Yep.
Yes.
you're back.
Okay, all right. I think I flipped from I flipped from one thing to another. Okay, so yeah, sorry, what you guys were saying that I heard was good. I don't know if you responded to Maria's comment. She said it's offensive to people who have that condition. I think Maria, it could have been intended as a pejorative or offensive reference, but I think what sort of was trying to say was that it's two different sides that seem to contradict each other, which I don't think is intended to be offensive, but maybe he can say. But on that point, that's really interesting because I wasn't aware of that. Personally, I think that this tells us something about the consequence of Australian politics and the way that the two major political parties create the conversation that we have. So the Liberal Party sometimes seems to exist for nothing but free trade and privatizing everything, right? Sometimes I wonder if they actually want to privatize the Defence Force too. You know, they want to privatize, right? But I can't think of too many examples of privatization that actually worked well, right? So I'm more a right-leaning person, right? But I don't agree with the Liberal Party on that policy, right? That doesn't make me bipolar. That just means that I disagree with the Liberal Party, right? And for example, that if that's considered left, that's only considered left because it's contrary to what the Liberal Party says, right? Or maybe there's other. You know, it's not a traditional conservative thing to privatize stuff. It's maybe more of a libertarian thing, which once again is that's kind of on the authoritarian libertarian. Once again, I don't think, you know. Anyway, I'm complicating things, but I find that very interesting because the point is that, for example, telecommunications, right? I'm always whinging about the fact that they privatize telecommunications, and that means that if I want to, you know, get good reception or whatever, then I have to get Telstra, which is exactly the same as what I would have had to do if they hadn't privatized it, right? So there's no competition, except that in the cities where, you know, it's where there's lots of people, then you can have competition, right? And all of a sudden, but for people out in the country, privatization has actually hurt us, right? So I just think it's a classic case of where the political parties actually set the conversation so that left and right it's not really about an ideological difference, and that's why it is actually quite natural to have views that are on both sides of the political spectrum, and I feel like I do, but that doesn't necessarily, you know, fit the conversation. The national conversation tends to be determined by the major political parties and what their views are on things.
But I think also the main parties don't also all agree anyway. Like if you look at the last federal prime minister got kicked out by his own party for not.
Yeah.
Happened a few times.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's a really important point. I think for us going into, I guess, any election or any vote or choosing to support a particular party, I think we all are very aware that we may not agree with 100% of that party's policies and the things that they want to implement. And that's where we can come to a point and have these discussions like we're having today, and even understanding that within the political space, they are basically trying to pull apart this idea of left and right by adding libertarian and authoritarian, because of the fact that now we are finding that there is a diversity within that spectrum, like you were saying. They basically, you know, within my secular lectures, they're like, no one is completely 100% right. and no one is 100% complete left. There always is a space in between that where people are like, I don't agree with that. Even though I would call myself a right or I would call myself a left, I actually don't agree with that particular area of the overall umbrella that is represented through right and left and all that sort of stuff. So I think that that's where we come and we sit at the table and we say, you know what, I do agree with those policies, but I don't agree with those. And I will even say, as an immigrant who came to Australia when I was 6, there are things even within One Nation policies that as an immigrant, I would be like, yeah, I can see the value in that. I can see the need for that. But then there are other things where I'm like, I wouldn't be here if I continued along the policies that Pauline Hanson does want to try and implement for Australia. So that's where we have to understand that there is a diversity even within people who, do associate themselves or do support certain parties, and we have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
We got a comment from Sorta.
Libertarian and sorry, Jason, go on.
No, you can read it. No, go for it.
Libertarian, authoritarian are just aspects of power control. Yeah. Now, I just want to. I know that it's just academic, because what you're talking about, Kat, is just an academic thing that, and I of course, they wouldn't be interested in my opinion, but I'm here, so I'm going to say it anyway. I think that's actually a bit of a false dichotomy between authoritarian and libertarian. I think you can be extremely libertarian and also extremely authoritarian. But it's more perhaps a matter of libertarian versus communitarian, perhaps, where everyone is expected to all behave the same. Whereas in libertarian system, everyone is allowed to be more individualistic. So take, for example, the old, once again, I guess I tend to think of things in terms of British politics because that's what I'm more familiar with. But in the old British system, they were very communitarian. They were not libertarian at all, really, but they were not authoritarian at all either. Everyone just behaved a certain way because society would reject you or would alienate you if you didn't. So it wasn't authoritarian. You wouldn't get put in prison for being different, but you would, people might not want to talk to you or something, or you might lose friends. So to me, what appeals to me about libertarian is the idea that we can all make our own choices and we can still get along with each other. But I don't think that just because you're not libertarian makes you authoritarian. I think that's just any government, no matter what its ideology, could become authoritarian, and then they could try to force everybody to do whatever they say. I'm not sure that that's actually an ideological. It's like populism. Anyone can be a populist. It doesn't make you have a different opinion about something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And look, as I just to clarify, I guess, as it was presented,
sure.
through my lectures, and obviously whatever that's worth, it definitely comes down to, as Sota mentioned, it does come down to this power control, but it's specifically in regards to government control. It's very specific as to how resources, like financial resources, are placed in services and how the population can access services. So it does come back a little bit to like socialist and capitalist ideas when we look at where do we sit between those levels of authoritarian and libertarian. It's often, as it was presented through my lectures, it's often associated to how government funding is used and the access of resources to those services by the general Australian population or whatever population it is that we're talking about. So, yeah, that's at least how it was presented in my lectures.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, it's been an hour. I think it's time we called it. Yeah, I think it's time we called it a night. And it's been great having a chat about these things. And thank you for those that joined in the conversation through the comments. That's really good to hear that different perspective. And please pardon our ignorance about many aspects of this, but I just thought,
yes.
Why not take this opportunity? Something's happening. I'm interested in it. And it gives us a chance to talk about things in a way that I think not enough people are doing. People are not having conversations about politics without getting crazy angry about it, you know. And I think if there's one thing that we can do as Christians is to set an example of kindness, you know, and care for even for those that maybe politically our enemies. Sort of says, cheers, guys. Cheers, sort of. Any other final comments from Catalina and Jason?
Not really.
Oh,
It looks like Labor's won, so.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'd just add what you were saying, Daniel. I mean, if we're realistic in any area, you get people talking about football teams, and you want to be able to sit with people, regardless of whether the team played well, should have won the premiership or not. You want to be able to sit with people and still learn from them, and to be able to have that interaction with them. And I hope that we can come to a point within society where we can do the same thing about politics. Hey, let me hear you out. Let me see what your perspectives are, and let me learn more of you through those discussions. Hopefully, we can get to a place where we can do that.
Sounds good. All right. Well, good night.
Good night, all. Thanks for coming.
Liberty or death.
All right. See you.
See ya.
See ya. I got this